I worked 31 years as a forensic accountant for the federal government. Not the glamorous kind you see on television. No gun, no badge, just spreadsheets and paper trails, and the quiet satisfaction of watching numbers tell the truth when people wouldn't. I retired at 63 with a good pension, a paid-off house in Knoxville, and more patience than most men my age have any right to claim. My wife, Gloria, passed 4 years before all this happened. Cancer. The kind that moves fast and doesn't give you time to argue with it. After she was gone, I rattled around that house alone for a while, learned to cook a few things, took up woodworking in the garage. I wasn't miserable. I was just quieter than I used to be. My son Nate is 41. We were always close when he was young. Fishing on Sundays, driving him to baseball practice. The usual things fathers and sons do. When he married his wife Simone, I welcomed her. I genuinely did. She was sharp, pretty in a hard-edged way, and she had opinions about everything. I figured that was fine. Gloria had opinions about everything too, and I'd loved her for 38 years. The problems started small. That's how they always do. Simone wanted them to move into a bigger house. Their neighborhood was fine. 3-bedroom ranch, good schools, 15 minutes from my place. But Simone had a friend who lived in a gated development on the east side of town, one of those places with a golf course and a fountain at the entrance. And once she'd been to enough dinner parties there, the house they had stopped being enough. Nate called me one evening, the fall after Gloria passed. He said they were thinking about refinancing, maybe pulling equity out to cover a down payment on something larger. He asked in a roundabout way that I recognized immediately, because I'd seen that same roundabout approach in depositions for 20 years, whether I might be willing to help. I said I'd think about it. What I gave them in the end was a loan, $60,000, drawn from savings I've been building since before Nate was born. I wrote it up properly. A promissory note, modest interest, a repayment schedule that started in 2 years to give them time to settle. I had it notarized. My old colleague Harvey, who'd done document work for the agency before he retired, looked it over and said it was airtight. Simone signed it smiling. Nate signed it without reading it. They got their house in the gated community. I went to the housewarming party. I helped Nate hang a ceiling fan in the master bedroom and ate Simone's dried chicken and said nothing about either. 2 years passed. No payment. I mentioned it gently to Nate once. He said things were tight, that Simone had taken some time off work after their daughter was born, that they'd get back on track soon. I said all right. I waited another year. Still nothing. I'm not a man who enjoys confrontation. I spent most of my professional life doing things quietly, on paper, letting the documentation do the talking. So I didn't call Nate and shout at him. I didn't show up at his door. I just started paying attention. In the spring of what would turn out to be the most important year of my recent life, I noticed something odd. I still had my name on a joint account I'd opened with Gloria years ago. A small account, barely used, but connected to the house, because we'd set up automatic insurance payments through it back when we first bought the place. I'd forgotten to close it after she passed. Simone knew about this account because I'd mentioned it once in passing when I helped them set up their own household finances during that first year. The balance was lower than it should have been, not by much, but I'd spent 31 years noticing when numbers were lower than they should have been. I pulled the statements. A transfer had gone out, small, the kind of amount that doesn't trip fraud alerts. The payee was listed as a property management company I didn't recognize. I sat with that for a few days. I didn't panic. I just started gathering. Here is what I eventually understood. Simone had found, through some means I still don't fully know, a paralegal who operated out of a strip mall office 2 counties over. This man, I'll call him what the court later called him, a disbarred associate acting outside his authority, had helped her draft a document. The document was a durable power of attorney, purportedly granting Simone authority over my financial and property decisions in the event of my incapacitation. The document had a notary stamp on it. The problem, their problem, not mine, was that I had never signed it. I had never appeared before a notary. I had never agreed to anything. My signature on that document was a forgery. A durable power of attorney requires the principal, the person giving up authority, to appear in person before a notary public, confirm their identity, and sign willingly in front of a witness. This is not a technicality. It is the entire foundation of the document's legal validity. You cannot notarize a signature on a document if the person whose signature it has never appeared in your office, which meant the notary stamp on that document was also fraudulent. What Simona had apparently intended, and I pieced this together slowly, the way I used to piece together embezzlement schemes, one receipt at a time, was to use this fabricated POA to refinance my house, pull out the equity, and use the proceeds to cover a second mortgage they'd quietly taken on the gated community house, the one they were struggling to maintain on two incomes that didn't quite reach the lifestyle they'd chosen. She'd been probing the edges of this plan for months. The small transfer from my joint account was a test, I think, seeing if I'd notice. I noticed. I did not call Nate. I did not call Simone. I did not call a lawyer yet, though I would soon. What I did first was drive to the county recorder's office and check whether any documents referencing my property had been filed. There was one. A preliminary title inquiry filed 6 weeks prior, connected to a title company I'd never dealt with. I asked the clerk behind the counter, a woman about my age named Dottie, who'd apparently worked there for 2 decades, whether she could pull the full request. She could. She did. She slid it across the counter without comment. But she watched my face as I read it, and I think she understood what she was looking at. I thanked her and drove home. I sat in the garage for about an hour. Not crying. Not angry, exactly. Just processing. The way you do when something you suspected turns out to be true, and the truth is worse than you thought yourself fully imagine. My son had either helped plan this, or had looked the other way while his wife did it. I didn't know yet which one was true. I'm still not entirely sure. I called my attorney the next morning. His name is Boyd. He handled Gloria's estate, quiet man, thorough. The kind of lawyer who takes 3 days to return a call because he's actually researching the answer. I told him what I had. He was quiet on the phone for a long moment, and then he said, "Don't touch anything, don't move any money, don't say a word to them. Come see me Thursday." I came on Thursday. I brought everything: the forged POA, the promissory note from the loan, the account statements, the title inquiry, photographs I'd taken of the recorder's documents. Boyd spread it all on his conference table and went through it the way a doctor looks at an X-ray. Methodical, not emotional. "This is wire fraud, deed fraud, and forgery," he said. "Possibly elder financial abuse under state statute, depending on how the DA wants to approach it." "My son is 41, I said. "I know," he said. "That doesn't change what the documents say." He filed a complaint with the county sheriff's financial crimes unit. He also sent a certified letter to the title company, alerting them that any transaction involving my property initiated through the disputed POA would be contested, and that the document in question was the subject of an active investigation. The title company called Boyd the next day. They froze the inquiry immediately. The paralegal who drafted the document, when investigators went to his strip mall office, had apparently already cleared out his files. But he hadn't been careful enough. He'd used his real business registration to notarize through a third-party service, and that created a paper trail cleaner than anything he could have shredded. I want to tell you about the morning I found out they knew I knew, because that's the part that stays with me. It was a Tuesday. Early. I'd been sleeping lightly those weeks, waking before dawn the way I used to when cases were active. I was at the kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper when my phone rang. It was Nate. He didn't say hello. He said, "Dad, what did you do?" Not a question. A statement with the particular flatness of someone who has just been told something that changes everything they thought they knew about how a situation was going to go. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I found out what was being done to me." Silence. A long silence. Then, in the background, I heard Simone's voice, sharp and urgent, telling him something I couldn't make out. Nate said, "We need to talk." "You can talk to Boyd," I said. And I hung up. They came to my house that afternoon anyway. I watched them pull into the driveway from the garage window, Nate driving, Simone in the passenger seat, with her jaw set in that particular way she had when she was readying herself for a performance. They knocked on the front door. I didn't answer it. I had nothing to say to them that Boyd hadn't already said in official correspondence. Simone knocked 3 times, harder each time. Then she stepped back on the porch and looked up at the house as though she could stare it into compliance. Nate stood behind her, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the ground. They drove away 20 minutes later. Here is what the investigation found in full. The notary, whose stamp appeared on the forged POA, was a woman who operated a small business services company, notary work, shipping, document prep. She had notarized the document. She claimed she'd been told by the paralegal that I was elderly, housebound, and that a representative had power to complete the notarization on my behalf. This is not how notarization works. She knew that, or should have known it, but she'd accepted $200 in cash to look the other way. She cooperated with investigators almost immediately. People usually do when they realize the alternative is a fraud charge on their record. The paralegal was harder to find. He'd moved to a cousin's house in another state, but the paper trail Boyd's investigator and the sheriff's unit had assembled was sufficient to issue a warrant. He was extradited back to Tennessee 8 months after I first walked into Boyd's office. Simone was arrested on a Wednesday morning in November. I know this because Boyd called me before the news reached Nate, and I sat with the information for several hours before my phone began ringing. There were 3 charges: deed fraud, wire fraud, and elder financial abuse. The last charge carries enhanced penalties under Tennessee statute, specifically because the intended victim was over 60. I answered 2 of Nate's calls that day. On the 3rd, I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was half apology and half accusation, the way people talk when they haven't yet decided which of those things they actually mean. He said he hadn't known the full extent of what Simone had done. He said he thought it was just paperwork to protect the family's interests. He said he needed me to tell the DA that he was cooperative. I told Boyd what Nate had said. Boyd said that was a decision I'd have to make when the time came, and that I shouldn't make it in November when I was still angry. Boyd was right. I waited. The trial took place the following spring. Simone's defense attorney argued that she'd been misled by the paralegal, that she hadn't fully understood what the documents meant, that the whole thing had been a misunderstanding. The prosecutor had the signed instructions Simone had emailed to the paralegal, instructions that were specific enough about what the documents needed to accomplish, and specific enough about the need to keep me unaware that the misunderstanding argument had no foundation to stand on. The paralegal had already taken a plea. His testimony corroborated everything the paper trail already showed. Simone was convicted on all 3 counts. At sentencing, the judge, a woman in her 50s who'd been on the bench for 12 years, and who I later learned had presided over 3 other elder financial abuse cases in the prior 2 years, sentenced Simone to 4 years in a state correctional facility. No early release consideration for the first 30 months, plus full restitution to me of the original $60,000 loan, plus interest, calculated at the legal rate from the date the promissory note was signed. The paralegal received 2 years and 9 months, to be served concurrently with other fraud charges brought in the county where he'd relocated. The notary lost her business license, was fined, and received 18 months of supervised probation. I don't particularly blame her. She made a choice she shouldn't have made, and she was held to account for it, and that's enough. What about Nate? This is the part I've spent the most time sitting with, and I won't pretend I've arrived at complete peace about it. Nate was not charged. The evidence didn't establish that he'd known about the forgery specifically, though I believe in my gut, the gut of a man who spent 31 years reading what people didn't say as carefully as what they did, that he knew something was wrong and chose not to ask questions. That's not the same as conspiracy in the eyes of the law. The law was right to draw the line where it did. He divorced Simone before the trial concluded. He moved into an apartment on the west side of town. He came to see me once, in the early fall, and I let him in, and we sat at the kitchen table where I'd taken that phone call from him months before. He apologized. He cried. I believed the apology, and I also believed that whatever he'd known or suspected, he'd let it go on longer than he should have, because the alternative, acknowledging what his wife was something he hadn't wanted to face. I told him I understood that. I told him I didn't know yet what kind of relationship we'd have going forward. I told him that was honest, and that I wasn't going to pretend otherwise just to make the conversation easier. He said that was fair. We're not where we were. I don't know if we'll get back there, but he calls on Sundays now, which he didn't do for most of his adult life, and sometimes we talk for half an hour about nothing important. And I think that might be the beginning of something, or at least the beginning of not losing something entirely. The restitution came through as a scheduled transfer, handled by the court, drawn against assets that were liquidated as part of the sentencing. I received the first payment in August. I put it back in the savings account where it had been before I loaned it to my son and his wife, back when I still believed a promissory note and good faith were enough. They're not always enough. But documentation is. Documentation and patience and the willingness to let the paper trail speak when you can't bring yourself to say the words out loud. I still do woodworking in the garage on Saturdays. I finished a rocking chair last spring, the kind Gloria always said she wanted for the back porch, though she never got to sit in it. I sit in it sometimes in the evening, looking out at the yard she planted, thinking about what it means to protect something you've spent a lifetime building. I'll tell you this. The morning after Simone's conviction came in, I slept 8 hours straight for the first time in over a year. I woke up and the house was just the house. Quiet and paid off and mine. And I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, and the only thing I felt was tired and grateful and very, very still. That's the whole story. Or at least, that's the part of it I know how to tell. I haven't asked, since all of this came out, whether I feel like I won something. People want it to be a victory. They want me to say yes. I beat them. I got justice. The system worked. And I understand why they want that. It's a cleaner story that way. But sitting in that rocking chair on the back porch, the one I built myself with Gloria's design in mind, what I actually feel isn't triumph. It's something quieter. Something closer to relief, that I was paying attention, and grief that I needed to be. Here's what I've come to understand, and I don't say this lightly because I spent a long time not wanting it to be true. The consequences that fell on Simone were not bad luck, and they were not my doing. They were the direct result of every choice she made, stacked one on top of another for months. She chose to find that paralegal. She chose to hand him instructions in writing. She chose to let a notary stamp a document I never sign. Each of those choices was a link in a chain, and the chain eventually held enough weight that it pulled everything down. Her freedom, her marriage, the life she'd built in that house with the fountain at the entrance. I didn't build that chain. I just refused to look away from it. That's the thing about integrity that nobody tells you when you're young. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's just the small, daily decision to keep your record straight, to notice when numbers don't add up, to ask the question even when the answer is going to be painful. I spent 31 years doing that professionally, and when it mattered most personally, the habit was already there. I didn't have to become someone different to protect myself. I just had to be the same person I'd always been. What I want people to take from this, especially if you're older and you've spent your life giving to your family the way I gave to Nate, the way most parents give without keeping score, is that protecting yourself is not a betrayal of love. Writing up a promissory note when you loan $60,000 is not an insult to your son. Knowing what your documents say is not paranoia. These are acts of clarity, and clarity is what makes love sustainable over time. Blind trust isn't love, it's just exposure. Nate is still working through what his role was in all of this. I believe he's being honest with himself about it, slowly. That matters to me, not because I need him to confess to something. The courts are done and I'm done, but because a man who can look clearly at his own failures has somewhere to go from there. A man who can't is stuck. The paralegal is serving time. Simone is serving time. The notary lost the business she'd spent years building. None of that happened because I was angry or vindictive. It happened because documentation is patient and truth doesn't expire. And the people who believed they could move fast enough to outrun both of those things were wrong. I still wake up early. I still make coffee before the sun is fully up. The house is still quiet, still paid off, still mine, and on the mornings when the weight of all of it settles in, not the legal parts, but the human parts, the part where my son's wife looked me in the eye at a housewarming party and smiled, I remind myself that I did what Gloria would have done. She was the most clear-eyed person I ever knew. She would have pulled those statements. She would have gone to the recorder's office. She would have called Boyd. I did all of that. And I'm still here.